This research was motivated by the crisis that has been facing journalism, particularly local journalism. It's difficult for local news outlets to sell advertising in this environment. It's so much more competitive. Getting people to pay for content, getting people to actually pay for journalism has gotten a lot more difficult. So everybody has been concerned about what that means for the future of local journalism. But one of the things that has been missing in terms of trying to understand this problem are tools that could be used to compare different communities to see how one community is faring in terms of the health of its local journalism relative to other communities. So this is something that policymakers have been concerned about. It's something that foundations have been concerned about because they are increasingly getting involved in funding local journalism. So there are a lot of questions about how can they best identify where to invest their money. What are the communities most in need? So the Geraldine R. Foundation and the Democracy Fund came to us and asked us to see if we could develop a methodology for assessing the health of local journalism ecosystems. And so that's what we were really focused on trying to do with this project. And it really was about not assessing how well individual media outlets were performing, but trying to determine what types of communities seem to be best able to sustain healthy local journalism. For this research, we focused initially on 3 communities in New Jersey. New Jersey is an interesting state as it relates to journalism for a couple reasons. One is that because it's sandwiched between 2 large media markets, New York to the north and Philadelphia to the south, for a state with its population size, it has relatively few local television and radio stations, which are still important sources of local news. In addition to that, it has over 500 municipalities. So different governments, different school systems, which means a really strong need for truly local journalism. But these large media markets have the effect of sort of undermining the viability of truly local journalism because so much news flows in from outside the state, from these large markets into the state. So we focused on 3 communities in New Jersey on their local news sources to see how healthy they were, how much news they were providing. We used 3 criteria. We looked at infrastructure, output, and performance. Infrastructure is essentially how many local news outlets are within this community and serving this community. Output is where we actually looked at the content and analyzed how much news are these outlets producing, and performance is where we actually evaluated that content on a few criteria. Was the story local or not? Was the story original or not? And was the story addressing one of what we've identified as critical information needs, that is substantive information about civic or economic or political life. So we looked at those 3 elements of their health of their local journalism: infrastructure, output, and performance, and we're able to compare across the 3 communities. And the 3 communities we looked at were Morristown, Newark, and New Brunswick. So for each of the 3 communities, we analyzed the number of sources that are available in the community, we analyzed their content across a couple of different criteria, and what we found was pretty striking. And in each case, we controlled for population size. And what we found, for example, when we compared, let's say, Morristown to Newark, was that a town like Morristown that's relatively small and has a relatively wealthy population had 10 times more local news sources than did a large lower-income city like Newark. And when we actually looked then at the output, at the amount of stories being produced in a sample week, that pattern even became more pronounced. So we found, for example, that Morristown local news sources during a 1-week time period produced 20 times more stories than did news sources in Newark. And then when we looked at criteria like the extent to which the stories were about the local community, the extent to which the stories originated within the actual news source rather than being links or aggregations from other sources, and the extent to which these stories address critical information needs, that they actually address substantive issues, we found that exact same pattern persisted, that Morristown sources were producing significantly more of that type of news than were Newark sources, and throughout all these analyses, the New Brunswick results tended to reside somewhere right in the middle. We only analyzed 3 communities, but the nature of the differences we found raised some questions about what we're calling information inequalities. That is, the extent to which different communities of different sizes and different characteristics might have real differences in terms of how healthy and how robust the local journalism is in those communities. And so as we do future research in this area, what we're hoping is to be able to understand why. What are the conditions, what are the characteristics of individual communities that help seem to predict different levels of journalistic robustness and health. And obviously the hope is that what we have here is a tool that could help policymakers, that can help foundations identify those type of situations where their intervention, their input, their help is most needed to support and strengthen local journalism.